So in 2005, I showed up in this community. And in 2009, I left this community. And I left this community in 2009 because I had a laundry list of critiques. And it was well curated. It was guidance for all of the leaders, guidance for the staff, guidance for the board, guidance for you. It was well appointed, and it was right. And surely you can understand why I had to leave, because I was right and this place was wrong. And a few years went by, and Nathan and I started going to First United Church of Oak Park. It was a union church between UCC and Presbyterian. Now, I have very clearly declared myself not Christian, but they had a great youth program, and I had a whole bunch of kids. So there I was, taking the membership class, and they were very progressive, very liberal, so I could swallow the pill. Except we got to the point where you then had to go before the community and say, I am a disciple of Jesus the Christ. Nothing wrong with that. It just didn't feel true in my soul. There was a context that lived in that community that just didn't feel true for me. Now, what's true is that I absolutely identify as a student of a master teacher named Jesus. And I just wasn't comfortable inside of a Christian context going before a community of people making that declaration. So I sat in that angst. My kids continued to enjoy the youth program. And Nathan and I began to have some divine discontent. There's something more for us. We long, we desire community. So the spiritual director at the time got wind of our interest in returning. Now, he and I had not spoken for a couple of years. He called me and he said, Lola. And I was sort of startled. I was pulling into my garage at the time. I sat there for a long period of time and chatted with him. And he said, there's something very important that you must know. Do you remember the long list of critiques that you had about the community? I said, oh, yes, I do. He said, it turns out those critiques can still be made. It turns out that if, in fact, you return, which is what I've heard, that you will still be able to make those very critiques. And I just want to make sure that you know that before you create a lot of suffering for you, but more importantly for me. And I said, well, thank you for the warning. And shortly thereafter, Nathan and I returned, and he was absolutely right. The same critiques that I had once before still remained. Except that I had had a shift in consciousness between 2009 and 2012. What I realized through my own exploration, my own development, was that if I was going to show up with a critique, it turns out you don't always have to articulate it. One learning. Second learning, I could be a complaint in the space, or I could be cause in the matter of something new showing up. Yeah, that's my mom. But actually, to know yourself as the source of solution. You know, a lot of times we'll show up in a space inside of a transactional relationship. I'm here to get something from you, and I expect you to deliver it up. And if ever there was an invitation on the planet that is evidenced by our political scene, it is that we must stop outsourcing our security, approval, and control. We must. We must affirm that we have agency. And what I've come to realize, being in a very progressive community, is that the same virus of the mind that gets fixated on being right can live in the most progressive of spaces, no differently than it can live in the most fundamentalist of spaces, the most conservative of spaces. And so we gather here to practice curiosity and wonder, because here's what I know to be true. If we get self-righteous, and in parentheses, we may be right, it makes no difference. Because we gather here to refine ourselves, to develop ourselves into being effective human beings. Being right and ineffective makes no difference. Being right, whatever that means, and effective, in fact, does make a difference. So, I was struck by this word community, because we call ourselves a community. And if you look at the Latin roots of that word, it comes from communitas. Com meaning together, munis meaning the performance of service. So in fact, a community means together we serve. Together we serve. So this month we are exploring this notion that we are all in this together. Now, to be in something together means to transcend the individual wants and needs. That was the big idea of the beloved community. Formulated by Josiah Royce, made popular by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the beloved community stood for the idea that all of humanity could share in the wealth of the earth. But there's a caveat. In order for that to be realized, we must have the capacity to transcend our individual wants and needs and to show up in service. Now, this community exists not because of the 4-person full-time staff. I'm sorry, the 3-person full-time staff. Recently, 3-time full-time staff, yeah? Okay. This community exists because people serve. I want to draw the distinction between the quality of being a volunteer and the quality of being of service. In the paradigm of volunteerism, you show up usually because the organization can't afford to pay you, so there's sort of a charitable construct set up. It's based on a scarcity model. And then you get to feel good about yourself because you volunteer where there's not enough of something. Clear? Service is very different. Service is an activation of love, an activation of generosity. It is a transcending of the individual wants and needs in circulation of good. Not because where I'm serving is broken and wounded and needs me, but because I need to serve. My neuroses need me to serve. When I serve, I get out of myself. The 2 most powerful ingredients of any recovery program that has any legs that I'm aware of is service. Why is that? Do you remember we started the year with "It's all about you"? Really what that meant was all of life is a projection of your world of beliefs. It doesn't actually mean that the world should orient itself around you. So as we move into this next iteration of this community, I want us to really ask, how can I serve? How can I serve? What must I become such that I can be a contribution on the planet? And oftentimes, in recovery spaces, it is said like, I don't have enough to give. I can't serve. You can't afford not to. You cannot afford not to. So as you sort of ask yourself, what is mine to give here? Don't look at your deficiencies. Look at your gifts. Look at your talents. Look at your genius. Focus on the abundance. Look at the overflow of your life. The other day, I was with our executive director, Jonathan Hoffman, and two community members, Aaron Gadiel and John Cook. And we were looking at a new building. I'm very excited about this new building. You'll get to hear more about that process on March 17th. At the end of the meeting, we sat in a little cafeteria kind of restaurant. And I didn't really say much other than the rooftop deck looked amazing. I could see a DJ and yoga classes happening up there, but that was it. And I said to John and Aaron, I said, as community members, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think of this place? And John said, Lola, do you remember just about 3 months ago? I don't think it was even 3 months ago. You said to me, John, we need a building. And I said, okay. And I said, by when? And you said, do you remember the date? I said, I do not. He said, you said by March 1st, less than 3 months later. Do you know what today is? He says, February 28th. I was like, wow. I said, well, what do you think? He said, I think it's perfect. It's everything this place needs. And I sat there and I looked around the table and I thought, this is the most glorious demonstration of service. Two community members that stepped forward by way of a call on a Sunday morning to say, I have a unique gift and talent that I can contribute. And I sat at that cafeteria table and I looked around and I was like, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room here. I can actually rest in these beings who are brilliant. To serve is to love. To serve is to give. To serve is to transcend the neurotic state of fixation on yourself. The obsessive, compulsive looking at what's wrong. Did any of you watch the Michael Cohen hearings this week? At the very end, Representative Elijah Cummings gave a very powerful word, a beautiful, beautiful demonstration of what it looks like to transcend righteousness. A beautiful demonstration. And he said to Michael Cohen, he said, you got caught up in it. You got caught up. Do you know the one in you that gets caught up in fear? Do you know the one in you that gets caught up in the problem? Do you know the one in you that gets fixated like a dog with a bone? And you're right about it. Watch the tendency to get caught up in it. So there's this brilliant man. His name is Ernest Holmes. He is one of my great teachers. He was a big deal in the 20s and 30s. He came out of a Judeo-Christian context. He was a spiritual philosopher during a period of time in this country where there was really a pushing of the envelope. What if, in fact, the presence of God is not some externalized authority pulling the puppet strings of your life? What if, in fact, there's a presence inside of you that is moving and breathing and having its way? And he was asked at the time to create this in sort of a Christian context, because that was really what there was a capacity for, a familiarity with. And he said, I don't want to create another religion. It seems to me we don't need one more religion. And so he said, I would prefer to call this a philosophy. Great. So he called it a philosophy. He wrote this book called The Science of Mind, and in that he writes, find me one person I mean, I don't know if he said it like that, but find me one person who is for something and against nothing, who is redeemed enough not to condemn others out of the burden of his soul. And there I will find another Savior, another Jesus, an exalted human being. Can you be for something without being against something? That right there is the work of mastery. To be for something and against nothing. Because the against something lives as a burden in your soul. Your soul is your subconscious mind. It is the houser of your beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions. And if you do not tend to that place in space, it wreaks havoc in the planet. So here we are to tend to the soul, to take radical responsibility for the judgments, the biases, the opinions, the beliefs that live in the soul, the subconscious mind, such that we can be for something and against nothing. As I've told you before, much of my time spent from about 13 to say 35 was me shouting at white people. And as I've told you before, it turns out it's not a very effective strategy. It turns out that no matter how right I may be, people don't like to be yelled at. Good awareness. Because guess what I'm committed to? I'm committed to transformation. I'm committed to evolution. I'm committed to change. I'm less committed to being right. And if I want to be an effective human being, I must get related to the burdens of my soul so that I can be for something and against nothing. Pema Chodron, great Buddhist monk, says the essence of generosity is letting go. Pain is always a sign that we are holding on to something. Generosity is an activity that loosens us up. So if you are experiencing pain, sometimes we call this a mood state, a fixation on something. It is each of our responsibility to look at the source of that, all of the cosmology that enables that to be in place. Because the practice of mindful awareness is to have loose knees, to be with life how it shows up. Not to have locked knees, dig your heels in, and be right. Nothing is available there. So we are all in this together. What is this? This community. This together we serve. So if you notice the one in you that shows up like a consumer inside of a transaction, it's just great to notice. If you have an interest in getting yourself to rub up against other people and find all the things you can critique about this place, get into service. It's good for your soul. To notice the critique, the perpetual critique. Guess where that lives inside of? The ego construct. That is the moment that we begin to deepen our commitment to separation. Separation being the antithesis of oneness. Now, does that mean we cannot disagree? Absolutely not. We can disagree. And wouldn't it be beautiful to develop a community of people that have the capacity to disagree in a transcendent way outside of righteousness? We have very little muscle for that. Humanity has very little muscle for that. What I watch in our classes here are human beings that have wonderful positions that I may agree with, but lose impact because of righteousness. So there's this brilliant man named Michael Beckwith, who perhaps you know, he's one of my favorite humans. He has a book called Spiritual Liberation. He says, architects of the beloved community are spiritual revolutionaries who realize that the solution to global challenges is a spiritual one, that conquest through war is at best temporary. Only conquest by love is permanent. So if we are looking, Einstein says you can't solve the problem with the level of consciousness that created the problem. Michael Beckwith said it's a spiritual issue. If you keep hitting your head against the wall at the level of effect, you're going to yield nothing. You might map this onto your life. What is an area of your life that you feel you're in the struggle of? And do you keep addressing it at the level of the problem? That was the beautiful thing of Elijah Cummings in the closing part of the hearings. He was a demonstration of grace in the face of the ugliest, perhaps. You got caught up in it. You can have perspectives, you can have opinions, you can have thoughts, you can have feelings, you can have beliefs. But when those thoughts, feelings, opinions, and beliefs start to play you, you're in a trance. Put on the thoughts, feelings, opinions, and beliefs. Serve a higher idea of what's possible. Rise into conscious naivete and create from that place. You can still have your perspectives, but transcend the realm of righteousness. It's boring, and you're here for something bigger. He goes on to say, we are not here to save the world. Just sit with that for a moment. Notice how much of your life you've oriented around saving someone or something. We are not here to save the world, but to serve an emerging paradigm of love, connectedness, and generosity of heart. To serve is to become a channel, an outlet, an inlet for the self-givingness of the Spirit, the presence of love that it may use you. To save something implies the past, a fixation on the past. To save something implies that it's fundamentally broken. Ernest Holmes said there is nothing to be healed, only God, only the presence, only love to be revealed. There is an arrogance that we walk in when we think we must save someone or something. How is everything that is occurring in your life whole and holy, perfect and complete? How is it a call, an invitation for you to rise up into your transcendent self, to release the attachment to your egoic self, and to walk with wonder and curiosity and contribution? We're here to have that impact. He further goes on to say, fear escalates negative change, while love escalates affirmative change. So I am not a believer that you will ever get rid of fear. You will not, my experience is as long as you are in this dimension of reality, you will experience fear. And you can choose, because you have agency, to move it consciously or to get taken out by it. That requires a discipline. So the question becomes, what is your practice to cultivate the discipline such that you can transcend the addictive nature of fear, the seductive nature of fear? Can I acknowledge fear? Can I feel fear? And can I not be taken out by fear? When someone approaches you, around something they want your support around, and the essence, the underpinning, is oriented in fear, do you have an attraction or an aversion? Now, you might collude at the level of fear, in which case you might find an attraction. But if you're in an awake state, you'll realize that it's a dead end. This is my great critique of the progressive movement today. It's using the very same tactics and being right about it. And you wonder why we have like a 50% voter turnout. People don't want to participate in that nonsense. I do think you should vote. Just my opinion. Out of an acknowledgement for ancestors that gave their life for the right and the privilege. And no matter how brilliant you are from your progressive perspective, you can be playing at the very same vibratory level